Welcome to the EQ for Life podcast. EQ for Life is a podcast based on your views as a parent, a companion, an entrepreneur, or business leader, and how learning to be smart about emotions plays out in everyday life. And now, let's continue with part 2 of this EQ for Life podcast.
So many emotional intelligence skills come out into play on what you just said. I think that's the high-level message if their coach is listening. The coach needs emotional intelligence, so they own it, and they can now start transferring those skill sets to their players.
That made me think a little of the coach. I touched on it, the head coach. I touched on it a little bit, but I mentioned accountability, which I think is powerful. Please, don't criticize your players. What you want to do is uplift them, encourage them, tell them you're there to help them get better. All this criticism is going back to the last century. That's leadership in the last century. That's Vince Lombardi, the football coach I admire and love the most. But that's the way it was then. Now it is the way it is. The way it is now has changed.
To further illustrate our point here, Bobby Knight. Now this is a case study in and of itself, Bobby Knight. Because if you know Bobby Knight, we all know it's 0 to 1,000 in less than a second, right? Full throttle, hijack we call it, behavior, and yet, and this is the paradox. The relational bond he had with these players. If you listen to these players after he passed away, what some of them talked about. And I think I'd like to hear your take on this, Bill, but I think that's how out on the front porch, a coach can ride your butt up one end and down the other and have the higher expectation you have on yourself. But if that's all you do, if you don't get them into the one-on-one and you don't get them into those moments, those emotional moments where you show them that you care, and edification is the word. We're here to edify them and lift them up so that they go beyond themselves. That's emotional intelligence. If you lack this and you're just riding their butt all the time, what's your take on Bobby Knight?
Yeah, first of all, Bobby Knight, I remember watching TV. You know how you go from one channel to the next. I'm watching Magic. Then I'm watching University of Florida. Then I'm watching Indiana. And I stay with Indiana because I'm watching the team perform out there. I'm watching how fluid they are. I'm watching how they pass the ball till they get the right shot. And then when I read On the Brink about Bobby Knight, it came to one point that he goes fishing and, during practice. You know what I said? Ain't no way. That's not happening. The coach doesn't get to where his team is performing at that high level if he doesn't care. He cares, and he is coaching them, and his mark is on those players. Do I like his antics? Hell no, I don't like his antics. I think he's lacking on a number of emotional intelligence, and I don't think it would work today. And in the end, it wasn't working for him. And so I still to today look for teams that have what the Indiana teams had back then. Of course, he was winning, had some great players, and but it was so enjoyable to watch his teams. I kept saying it's don't throw a chair across the floor, don't choke any of your players, or whatever he tends to do. But you had Woody Hayes at Ohio State was the same way. He would hit a player, he'd take a down marker, and he would fold it in half on his knees, and if you ran, if you got a good play and you were over near him, he'd hit you. I mean, the opposing team. Well, that was too much. So, if he had emotional intelligence, you would not. What is emotional intelligence for self-control? You wait a little while. You don't react right away. Sometimes you can say, well, if someone yells at you, you need to think before you react. I remember
delayed gratification.
Yeah, I remember a coach was yelling at me, which isn't unusual. The coaches yell, and they were yelling at me, and I just I using emotional intelligence. Earlier in my career, I would have yelled right back. We had been on good yelling terms, but I just said, "Why don't we talk? Why don't you talk in a civil way?" And I think I hit a nerve when I said that to him, because
Yeah.
never again did he show any of that. I think he just never acted that way again. It was
Right.
always something that if we use emotional intelligence, there's so much you can be done. Or if I'm out coaching and somebody in a boat says, "You Blakey," whatever to me, I just say, "Well, hold that thought. When we get back to the boathouse, we'll talk about it."
Right.
And then when we get back to the boathouse, that person's almost in tears because he had to think about that, and I didn't react to it. So this wasn't always the case. That's why it's important to get back and look at emotional intelligence and study it. I'm a firm believer that you know how to learn better than anyone else knows how to teach you. And what I mean by that, if you need to improve something, you're old enough and smart enough that you figure out how you're going to do it. It may be you just look at it every day, set it aside for 15 minutes and look at it every day. It may be you're going to take videos of yourself and you're going to look at the videos and you're going to listen to yourself and you're going to be embarrassed at what you said and you're going to improve that. So I do think emotional intelligence. I'm going to go right back to one funny story about one-on-one. So there was a football coach near the college, and he happened to be over at the university, and I invited him in my office, and I said, "You need to do one-on-one because at that time you can really get to know the player, and don't talk about technique or the games. Talk about their lives and what is they're concerned with. That you have a little empathy for where they're at." And so I talked, and the next year I saw him, and I said, and what I told him is that you need to meet one-on-one with every player. He said, he had 60 players. And so the next year I said, "Did you do one-on-ones?" And he said, "I had it on my list to do, but I didn't do it." And that's when I said, "Well, when you want to win, when you decide you want to win, then do emotional intelligence." So the next year comes about, and I said, "Did you do one-on-one?" He says, "Yes, I did. I did one-on-one with every new player on the team. I worked very closely with him." And I said, "What was your record this year?" Because I really didn't know. He said it was 9-1, and we made the district did well. And so I thought it was funny to say, "Well, when you want to win, you'll do one-on-one." I also say this to coaches. Say it to
Listen,
all.
I got to chime in real quick because we are talking about a lot of stuff here. But you talked about the goats of coaching. I call them the goats of coaching, right? The legends, right?
Right.
And the way they used to do it, what the message is that emotional intelligence, we didn't have it, we didn't know what to call it, but it was present. It was there. They were, if emotional intelligence and the 25 skills, right? The 3 sets that a person is doing on their own, the 2 sets that a good coach will demonstrate in behavior. They were the legendary coaches were doing it. They were doing some other things that we wouldn't say are productive today or effective at all, but they were utilizing behavior and emotion to get the best out of an individual or in some cases the team. And it's not your opinion or mine that validates this. That's what we love about athletics. It's the stat. It's the number. Those numbers tell the game and the story that there was something else going on. Because we know the bad behaviors are effective, but yet what else were they doing? They were demonstrating emotional intelligence skills. We just didn't know what to call it. So that's the call for the coaches today. Teach your task, play your game, bring your little black book and all the best little trade secrets you can. But when the field is level, Our athletes are built the same. The game is played the same. That have touched the mental and the emotional are going to perform at higher levels more often. And I think that's really what we're talking about. Is the sustainability of it.
Well, I was listening to ESPN Sports talking about the recent resignation of Dick Vermeil and, of course, Nick Saban. When they ever ask me what is my Myers-Briggs evaluation, I'll always say it's ESPN. And so I'm listening to them, and they're really talking about emotions. And the emotions they were talking about, in the case of Dick Vermeil, who's a great emotional coach, is that this is what they said. He wasn't able to relate as well to the new players coming in, whether this is true or not. But what is important is that you have different changing, groups of people as they grow up and what they expect. And you just have to understand them. And again, going back to one-on-one or just studying emotional intelligence, because I can tell you this with certainty, you cannot go wrong if you understand emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence, as I said earlier, is all incorporated in transformational leadership, which is the best leadership style you can use for change, for just dealing with a lot of change and with making sure that you're engaging and you're involving everyone on the team. I just don't see how it can fail. I don't see how it can fail. Now, maybe there's some professions that are different. I was thinking about this yesterday. Maybe you need to yell at some people, but I said, wouldn't it be nice to look at across all the professions and do research as to what effect it has? My guess is this: no matter what area that you're in, if you're using emotional intelligence right, you're going to improve the performance, their performance. And
yes.
I just don't know why you wouldn't do this, because all you're going to get is good results. You're going to better prepare the student athlete for their careers and how they relate to people. And they're always going to be thankful for what you shared with them. And so I think I told you the story in 1995 when emotional intelligence first came out. I had a professor named Dr. Roger Manley, and he was teaching a leadership class. And I was able to go in and talk to him. I was, of course, coaching at that time, and I was athletic, but I always go in. And on the front of his door, he had his Myers-Briggs assessment qualities, which I thought were similar to mine. But he always had an open door, and we always chatted. And then one day, he gave me this book. He said, "I just got this book in." Now, this is 95. And if you know when emotional intelligence came out, you'll know it was right at that time. He said, "I just got this book in because I teach leadership from the publisher. And you should look at it because it's starting to get a lot of traction." And I have that book to the day, plus many other books that Goldman has written. And I just encourage that. Now, to the credit of people who know emotional intelligence, I think more research in colleges is done on emotional intelligence than other subjects, because it does have a great impact. And I'm such an advocate for it. And I just believe that what's important in life and leadership, I think communication is right up there at the top, because if you're not communicating, what are you doing? And then secondly, I think relationships are important. And I feel strongly in this way about relationships. And of course, emotional intelligence talks in depth about relationships, is that you and you alone you are responsible for relationships. What I mean by that is, if you want it to last, you make it last. If you think at some point, well, this person isn't communicating with me. A friend of mine just passed away this past month, and they had his funeral service on Saturday, and they talked about it, and he kept sending me things and kept sharing things with me. And I said, he's doing it, and I'm not doing it as well as he's doing it. And when I talked to his wife, she seemed to know everything that we had talked about. And I said, wow, he's very powerful. He understands he understands relationships and how to maintain them and do well. He's very powerful in that.
You talk about communication. Oh, there's my balloons. You talk about communication. EQ, emotional intelligence, helps us learn to communicate first with ourselves. Self-respect is a skill of EI. I can now measure. I can base that skill on scale from 1 to 10 on how you talk to yourself. Self-respect is an emotional intelligence skill. It helps me communicate more with myself and others. Again, others communicate, I can with influence. And then you mentioned relationships. I can have a better relationship with myself by understanding emotional intelligence. And then again, enhancing the relationships, which, we have family relationships. We have, we're talking about coaching, which is we call career relationships. Let me get your take on this one. And we've been going almost an hour, Bill. I still have a few more minutes. You have a few more minutes?
I didn't even know an hour had passed.
Bless your heart. Yeah, I know how fun we are, right? I want to share this with you again in the aspect or the context, rather, of emotional intelligence and athletics. I have now. I'm gonna say it's twofold. They're corporate. I have two. I have a young lady that played D1 softball at Washington, and I have a young man that D1. I take that back. I don't think he was a D1. He played D2 football somewhere up near Buffalo, Syracuse. They're corporate now. The game's over. They did their 4, maybe they did their 5. I don't know the in-depth of it, but I met them in the corporate world. I am fascinated, Bill, and how many times I can use the game, athletics, sports, pressure, to, as they're now out here in the real world, sitting in meetings with people that are rude, conversations they don't like or they maybe don't understand. And yet they still have to maintain optimal. They got to be your best in the meeting. You still got to be your best, right? And helping them see how emotional intelligence skills helps them in those moments. The game's over. They took the same assessment you did. And like you were off the chart. They too are remember that's a knowledge base, so they know. But they lack the ability to bridge. Okay, we're not in a game. I'm not looking at a pitcher throwing gas, and I'm not trying to get a read off the quarterback. I'm now seeing in a meeting in the corporate world, same skills.
I've often thought that too. I have an infographic that talks about personal development and professional development, and obviously emotional intelligence is on that. And I think that it's good to end with this comment, is that we have to have a growth mindset. And the growth mindset, Carol Dweck, the author of, she wrote a book on growth mindset, and that I communicated with my son this morning. And he teaches first grade. And on the wall in his first grade class, in fact, he sent it to me this morning, is a poster, growth mindset poster. It talks about what a fixed mindset is and what a growth mindset is. And this is for first graders. And I I just thought that was so powerful. So if you have a growth mindset, it takes you out of where you're at and puts you into where you want to be. Much more powerful where you want to be than where you're at. Because if you're at where you're at, and if you're not looking to better itself, sometimes you get defensive, and you share. You try to build yourself up at where you're at, but that never happens if you have a growth mindset. If you have a growth mindset, you don't have time to think about any negative aspects in your life. You think about the positive aspects, where you want to be, what you want to achieve. And I encourage everyone. Oh, the culture of Microsoft, by the way, the CEO of Microsoft in his book, he said that the culture of Microsoft, the primary culture of Microsoft, is a growth mindset. And of course, there's been some papers out, a little differing from the book a little, that says you're not always there, but you're not always there with emotional intelligence either. You need to realize that you're fluctuating back and forth, and that you need to get back there. Because I was in the car the other day, and someone almost cut me off, and I used absolutely no emotional intelligence, but I did do this. I did think that I needed to. I need to work on that, because you can't let yourself slip away from what you know. And so the growth mindset is the same thing, because when the book first came out, it made it seem like you can get there and then you're there. And the answer is no, you have to keep working, because you'll slip back, because human nature is human nature. And so what you want to do is to prepare yourself with emotional intelligence to not fall into the normal situations. And so that's why it's so powerful. You know, what is the big situation on a sports field or in an office? Someone makes a big mistake. And so you can yell at them, you can tell them that they better watch out, it may not happen again. Or you can say to them, you know, I've had situations like this myself. You learn from this, and you learn from this, and you know you're going to be much more productive, and you're going to be much better off as you move forward.
It's not natural. Now, I use the word not. I'm trying to stop using the word not. If it's not natural, what is it? It needs to be nurtured. These skills, nurture versus nature. But growth mindset, Bill, that's something, man, I got to tell you. I've been giving that some thought. You know, I'm hearing that in cultures. That's buzzwords now. If you're an athlete, you come up in your junior high years, your high school years, you're lucky enough to play collegiate ball. That's baked in. The notion of doing better, improving your stats. For me, it was baked in as an athlete. But then, like I see so many, I'm not an athlete anymore. I don't play collegiate ball. The collegiate ball ends. I'm now in the corporate world. It's more of the old accept me as I am. This is who I am. Seems to be the norm, maybe majority. So that whole growth mindset, I think we're onto something here. You know, you got to talk about it. If you have a growth mindset, I'm going to use my TEA model here. You're thinking different if you got a growth mindset. Your E, your motives, your values, that's all E bucket there. You're feeling different if you have a growth mindset.
Well,
the A.
Yeah, I was just going to say on a growth mindset, it's very obvious to me that when a person has a growth mindset, they're more confident in themselves. It just changes their attitude about themselves and about other people. I've seen it. You know, I don't need any research, because I've seen people who understand it, and they're a lot more confident. They're happier. because a growth mindset isn't just, this is where I want to end up. A growth mindset is setting sequences, steps along the way that you want to achieve, that are achievable. And so you achieve that little achievement and you feel good about it. And then you achieve another one, then another one. And that's pretty much the way of thinking in leadership these days,
Right.
is that
Right.
you set steps. And if you have a team and you're working with that team, you set a little step and then you set another step, because then the team feels like we're getting there. These are steps to getting there. We're getting there. So
Success.
that's where how to employ growth mindset is to make sure you understand that and you work hard, because that they know. And one other thing, if go ahead.
Well, I didn't want to cut your flow off there. In regards to that mindset concept, one of the modules in my training program has to do with the past. You choked, dude. You choked. You dropped the ball. Think of the Ohio State coach right now. You choked. Or maybe you didn't choke, but you sure gave it your best and you didn't cross the finish line. How you selling on that now? So the growth mindset has to do with how I frame my past failures, past successes. Growth mindset has everything with me being my best right now in the moment and achieving optimal states. And it also, like you just said so well, and that is, it has steps forward. So when you talk about growth mindset, I mean, there's a lot to it, man. All of it is spun through emotional intelligence.
It's like being accountable. When a person's accountable, they always feel better about themselves. I just thought when the coach was smart enough to know that he had everything in place, the context was there. And he realized that if he didn't fail, he didn't think it would be because any circumstance outside of him. He put it all inside.
Right.
He put it into himself. And that was a good feeling. Though he went as far as saying he would give up coaching because he had he knew it. He was perceptive in what he had. And so that's part of emotional intelligence too. Being perceptive, not just empathetic, but and having perspectives on people what people you're working for. Understand all of those, and you can move forward with the team. But it's always, the team always needs to know that they're the ones that are doing it. They are the ones that it has nothing to do with you, other than the fact you're being accountable, as they should be accountable, to making sure that if it's not done, it's my fault. If they're acting like fools out there, it's my fault. If they rode or their worst race ever, it's my fault. It's not them. And
behavior.
So what that does is that it gives you energy. If you take it upon yourself, it creates a lot more energy and enthusiasm to make it happen, because you know that to a degree it's in your hands. You have the talent. You have, or you can phase that down to, you may not be winning an Olympics, but you may be winning the district. And that's what your goal is. You go from the state race to the Southeastern race to the national race, and you set your goals along the way. And so coaches need to make sure that they spend a lot of time doing that, and they do it one-on-one.
One-on-one.
I don't see how you're going to lose. I don't see how you can lose when you do it that way.
Well, again, I think we've done it enough. You've seen it enough. I call it the best practice playbook, where you gather up all that we know about what's been done right. And you and I would both agree that one of those checklists there is a one-on-one, where you're building that bond, building that relationship. And again, we could put it on as a checklist, but it's your emotional intelligence skills coach that's going to conduct that meeting, that's going to feel that it's genuine and not just a checklist that you're trying to get through. It's all emotional intelligence. So let me ask you this, Coach, and I'm calling you Coach. I feel like we're coaches.
That's who I am. I
I
enjoy this.
know, I know. So listen, I'm thinking of it's twofold. I want to talk about the emotional intelligence skill of ego management. It's the fifth competency, and it's the fifth skill. I think it's the pinnacle. It's the hardest of the hardest. The ego management. Talk about it. But the scene I want to reference, just as a reference, we'll come back to ego management. They're struggling. Going back to Boys in the Boat, they're struggling. The main character, the young athlete, the blonde, he's distracted. He's got that young female, and he looks up to Coach, and he says, "I don't care. I don't care." Which, on the scale of the training, that's apathy. Apathy. No room for it. No room for it. So the coach has a moment out of the boat. Tough. That's emotional intelligence all the way around, from the kid wanting to give up, to the toxicity it spreads in the boat, to the coach being put in a position, right? To the alternate stepping up, right? And then a scene later, the kid swallows his pride. That's emotional intelligence. Comes back to the coach, confronts him, what, one-on-one. Again, the coach has a decision to make right then and there, right? Is that enough? Did he let the kid in? Like, all of it emotional intelligence. Is that ego management? I don't know so much. You have any input on this either way, Coach? Either the skill of ego management, or that scene or set of scenes?
There's a book that I've read on. I'm forgetting the exact title of it, but it's really a good book on egos. And it made it sound like egos are the most destructive thing a person could have. And I've had people even tell me is that don't let your ego get into that. Don't let your ego. But it's hard to not appreciate people's egos. But I love, when I'm trying to think of the author who wrote the book on comparing, let's see, what is the name? It's about great corporations. And, he talked a lot about ego, but what he found common with the leaders is that they were humble, and they were humble and had a strong work ethic. And the book goes on further to say, great, it's coming to me, good to great. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And so they were humble, and they had strong work ethics. And so to me, when your ego is put in the back seat, when you take a more humble disposition and you say, when you put people above you, that doesn't show that you have an ego. When you put your team above yourself, and that's what a lot of these, when you call them humble, that's important. So I think that the charismatic leader of the past is no longer effective. So going back to the ego, I'm more inclined to say a humble leadership is the best way to go. The book Good to Great talked about humble leadership, and I would encourage people to place others above themselves, and that diminishes the power of the ego. And when you're talking one-to-one on people, which was very characteristic of a lot that was written about, and when you give praise, it's not about yourself, but it's about everyone else. You have a powerful team. You have a powerful corporation, and people know that you mean it. Being authentic is much important as anything. And emotional intelligence is not to try to be what other people are, but making sure that you are who you are, and that you have core values that are values that you put into your being. and you follow those core values. And if that's
Absolutely.
what you want to be, any decision that you make it off your core values. And usually your core values are going to be trusting, honesty, ethical. These are the values that you want to use. And consequently, they're good for you. And it's more of a humble nature and the ego. So I would set myself up so that ego wasn't prominent. And when I know that my ego, again, back to human nature, is starting to enter into it, I look inwardly a lot at it and what I can do to improve that and not succumb to something that will only create anxiety. And
Right.
you don't need all that anxiety. You need to go through life. It was pretty much like Dick Vermeil said yesterday in his resignation. He said, I have as much energy today as I had at the beginning of the season. I'm just as enthusiastic now. He was basically saying that he should have continued as a coach. But, it's always a mutual agreement on that, as he said. And I like it when a coach goes from here to another place. Lou Holtz was always one of my favorites. He could go anywhere and do well. And they still have a statue of him outside Notre Dame.
Well, it's like Dungy. I mean, Dungy was able to duplicate his success a couple of times.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
These
A good coach.
These guys
right?
are walking emotional intelligence models.
Mm-hmm.
Really good.
Listen, we're going to have to come to a close here, Coach. I tell you, there's a lot of stuff that you and I could continue talking about when it comes to athletics and emotional intelligence. We're going to have to do this again.
Thanks a whole lot for inviting me. We've talked about this for years, and it's a reality now, and let's do it again.
So listen, I want to highlight something as we kind of come to a close, because you're all about sharing. You are, if I can put it this way, an open book with the things that you've learned. Again, coming up as an athlete, being a coach, and being over coaches to coach young athletes. How can people get a hold of you? If folks wanted to get a copy of the book, the website, email, what are we going to refer them?
Oh, I don't think we really talked about the fact that I just co-authored a book with Bill Potter, and it's a history of intercollegiate athletics at Florida Institute of Technology. And if in that sense, that book really talks about Title IX. It talks about COVID. It talks about the value of athletics. It talks about how a program grows from the startup of a university in 1958 to 2023 and the successes. And it's not all about excuses. The great thing about the emotional intelligence that is in that book is it's finding a way. When you see a problem, you look at the problem and then you solve it. But anyway, I think a lot of that is in that book, and accessing it is very simple. It's on Barnes and Noble and Amazon.com.
Okay. Who's it geared for? Is it geared for coaches or athletic directors in general? Or
I think it's just geared for people who enjoy intercollegiate athletics and want to see how, the different intricacies, the values, the importance of it. As one person said in the book, it's the way it should be done, in keeping with the vision of a university, and keeping with the strategic objectives of a university, strategic objectives. And so nice. I think it's good in that sense.
Excellent. Something else, I know that we're starting to wrap, we're going to close on this one, but maybe we could consider, just like the big game the other night, right? Michigan, Alabama, looking at it through the eyes of emotional intelligence. Maybe we could do some more stuff like this with some big games.
I loved the game the other night. I tell you, I was more excited about those 4 teams playing. The 2 weeks couldn't come fast enough.
Well, yes. And I'm fascinated with your seat on the bus. Again, you kind of got a connection through the athletic director side of all these schools and the folks. So you always got another view or perception of everything. So Always fascinating to listen to you talk about what's actually going on.
Yeah, I enjoy it too, and I try to stay in touch with as many as possible in the Gulf South Conference, as well as in the Sunshine State Conference.
Excellent. All right, my friend. Well, listen, my expression of gratitude to you for all that you do for the industry of sports and athletics, but certainly sharing some time with me on the podcast.
You've been listening to the EQ for Life podcast. To learn more about the EQ for Life podcast or Parrish, please contact us online at info@parrishowentaylor.com or call 866-487-2815. That's 866-487-2815.